He looked me in the eyes and said, "It's just another day, Margaret. There's nothing worth celebrating." After 40 years of love, sacrifices, and building a life together, my husband forgot our anniversary, and worse, he dismissed it like it never mattered. But what I did next changed everything. Marriage, they say, is a journey, a collection of shared moments, little gestures, and a lifetime of compromise. For 40 years, I believed in that. I believed that love would always find its way back, no matter how far apart we drifted. But what happens when the one you've given everything to stops seeing you? When the partner of your soul begins to treat you like furniture, present, useful, but no longer noticed? That morning, when Harold brushed off our 40th anniversary like dust on his sleeve, I realized something monumental. I had been holding on to the idea of us longer than he had. And that's where this story truly begins. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster of self-discovery, lost love, and new beginnings, don't forget to hit the like button if you've ever felt unappreciated in a relationship. Subscribe for more deeply moving real-life stories every week. The morning of June 3rd started like any other. Birds chirped outside our window, and the early summer sun peeked shyly through the linen curtains. I lay in bed for a few moments, watching the way the light danced across the ceiling. 40 years. Today marked 40 years since Harold and I said I do. A flood of nostalgia filled me, memories of that warm, sunny morning in 1985, my lace dress, his trembling hands, the way he whispered forever against my ear during our first dance. Back then, we had nothing. No house, no savings, no children. Just two beating hearts and a belief in us. I reached across the bed, smiling. But his side was empty. Still warm, but empty. I sat up and stretched, listening for sounds from the kitchen. Maybe he was preparing breakfast. Maybe he was planning something simple, sweet. Even toast and tea with a flower plucked from our garden would have filled my heart. Slipping on my robe, I made my way down the stairs, excitement blooming in my chest. I paused to glance at the photos on the stairway wall. Our wedding photo. The kids' baby pictures. A lifetime of memories lined up like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. The smell of coffee greeted me before I even reached the living room. There he was, Harold, sitting in his recliner, still in his worn-out flannel robe, eyes glued to the morning news. He held his coffee cup in both hands like he always did when he was deep in thought. "Morning," I said gently, the corner of my lips curling into a hopeful smile. "Morning," he replied without even glancing my way. I stood still for a moment, waiting. Waiting for recognition. For the flicker of realization. For him to remember the significance of today. Nothing. I cleared my throat, my voice lighter than it felt. "Do you know what today is?" He took a sip of his coffee, then shrugged. "Friday?" The answer sliced deeper than I expected. I hesitated. "It's June 3rd. Our anniversary. 40 years, Harold." He blinked, slow and blank. "Oh. Right. That. I echoed, trying not to let the hurt show. He turned his eyes back to the screen. "Margaret, it's just another day. There's nothing really worth celebrating, is there? Just another day." I felt the weight of those words land heavily on my chest. Just another day. To him, our 40-year marriage, the years of shared struggle, growth, compromise, joy, grief, was nothing more than another square on the calendar. My throat tightened. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the fabric of my robe. I stood there, unmoving, hoping that maybe he'd look up and see the pain written all over my face. But he didn't. "I'll make breakfast," I said softly, retreating into the kitchen before my emotions could betray me. As the eggs sizzled in the pan and toast popped from the toaster, my mind replayed his words over and over. There's nothing really worth celebrating. I thought of the birthdays I never forgot. The surprises I planned. The nights I stayed up with him during his hospital stays. The anniversaries I stitched together with love letters, framed photos, silly dances in the hallway. Was none of it worth remembering? I placed the plates on the table, but Harold didn't move. He stayed in the recliner, sipping coffee, his gaze still distant. When he finally did sit down, he ate without a word. No compliment. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself and went back upstairs. I needed space, from the room, from him, from the deafening silence that had replaced our connection. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the jewelry box on my vanity. Inside was the necklace he gave me on our 25th anniversary. A silver chain with a heart-shaped locket. I opened it. Our photo, young, laughing, full of hope, smiled back at me. Tears welled in my eyes. How had we come to this? I didn't want to play the victim. I didn't want to sulk. But I needed to understand. Was this how all long marriages end? In comfort so deep it becomes indifference? Later that afternoon, I watched him mow the lawn, check the mail, tinker with the porch light. Still no mention of the day. Not even a passing comment. The ache in my chest grew heavier, but so did something else, a sense of clarity. Maybe this moment wasn't just about what he forgot. Maybe it was about what I had forgotten too, myself. And that realization was the beginning of something unexpected. Because sometimes, when the world around you stops celebrating you, you have to celebrate yourself. I didn't cry, not that morning, and not even later that night. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that my heart felt too numb, as though it had been vacuum sealed in a thick fog of disbelief. So instead of tears, I found myself wandering. Not outside. Not physically. But emotionally. Mentally. Internally. Through time. I made myself a cup of tea, not the usual black, but chamomile, the kind I used to drink in my early 30s when the kids were still little and sleep was rare. I took that tea to the sunroom, curled into my corner chair, and opened the oldest photo album on our shelf, the one with the worn maroon cover and the golden trim that had faded to bronze. The first picture was our wedding day. Harold in his light gray suit, thinner than he is now, eyes shining like polished stones. Me, with my lace sleeves, veil cascading like a waterfall over my shoulders, and that smile, the kind of smile only a woman deeply in love could wear. That smile was not just love, it was certainty. I had no doubt in my heart that day. None. We married young. I was 22. He was 24. It wasn't a grand wedding. We had it in my parents' backyard under the old maple tree. Aunt Lydia made the cake, and Harold's best friend Carl played the guitar for our first dance. I remembered how Harold whispered, "Even if we have nothing but each other, I'll be the richest man alive." Nothing but each other. Those words echoed now like a ghost of a promise. I turned the pages slowly. A photo of us on our first vacation, Niagara Falls, 1985. We couldn't afford the fancy hotels, so we stayed in a tiny bed and breakfast run by a widowed lady who made pancakes shaped like hearts. Harold spilled maple syrup on my dress, and I laughed so hard I snorted. He said it was his new favorite sound. I looked up from the album and out the window. The garden was blooming, my lilies, my roses, the peonies Harold planted for our 10th anniversary. I had loved that gift more than any diamond ring. Flip. Our first child, Michael, in Harold's arms. He was terrified of holding newborns. But oh, how gentle he was. How he whispered lullabies at night when he thought I was asleep. He took time off work just to stay home with us. He paced the floors during teething weeks. He sang the Beatles off-key and didn't care who heard. Flip. Claire's first ballet recital. Jamie's science fair trophy. Christmases around the fire, Halloween costumes made of cardboard and love, Sunday pancakes, late-night movie marathons, fighting over which flavor of popcorn to buy. Every page told a story of us. A timeline not just of growing children but of growing together. We weren't just partners. We were teammates. Builders. Lovers. Survivors of life's relentless changes. So when did that stop? When did Harold stop seeing me, Because I hadn't stopped seeing him. I noticed every gray hair, every sigh, every night he stayed up too late watching history documentaries. I noticed when he started taking longer walks alone. When he stopped asking me to dance in the kitchen. When he kissed my cheek instead of my lips. It didn't happen all at once. No, love rarely breaks with a bang. It unravels. One thread at a time. You don't even notice it at first, not until the garment is in tatters. I closed the album and sat still for a long while, my fingers resting lightly on the cover. Did I let this happen? Was I too busy being a mother? A grandmother? A homemaker? Did I forget how to be a wife, a woman, his companion? Or did he simply stop trying? That night, I made dinner again. Roasted chicken with rosemary and thyme, his favorite. The smell filled the house, just like old times. I set the table with our best plates. I lit 2 candles. I poured him a glass of wine. And he didn't come. He ate in the living room. Played on his lap. Watching a baseball game. When I joined him, he smiled faintly and said, "This is good." Just that. No mention of the candles. The wine. The gesture. And something inside me finally broke, not in anger. Not in despair. But in resolution. After he went to bed, I cleaned the dishes, packed up the album, and opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside were letters. Real, handwritten letters he had written to me, before we got married, in our early years, and on anniversaries past. "I love you more with each passing day," one read. "You are my favorite part of life," said another. I read them all. Every single one. Tears rolled down my cheeks, not out of sorrow, but because those words still lived. They were real. He had meant them. Once. And I had been loved. Deeply. Fiercely. Maybe I still was. Maybe he just forgot how to show it. Or maybe he stopped. Either way, I knew this, I had not stopped loving me. And maybe it was time to find the version of Margaret who wasn't just Harold's wife, the kid's mother, or the quiet woman in the background of every photo. Maybe it was time for me to see myself again. Not as someone who needed celebration from others. But as someone worth celebrating. Even if I had to be the only one who remembered. The morning after our 40-year anniversary, or rather, the morning after he forgot it, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even kissed the horizon yet, but my body felt restless. It was like my soul was pacing a tight corridor inside my chest, desperate for something to break open. I sat up and looked over at Harold. He was snoring gently, mouth slightly parted, brows furrowed even in sleep. I studied his face, the lines around his mouth, the softness in his jowls, the age that had crept up on both of us like a slow tide. He looked like the man I married. Yet somehow, he felt like a stranger. I slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom. As I stared into the mirror, I didn't quite recognize the woman who looked back at me. I wasn't sad. Not anymore. There was no trace of the grief that had gripped me the day before. No. What I felt was something sharper. Clearer. The storm had passed, and now I stood in the aftermath, looking around at the wreckage. I wasn't crying. I wasn't waiting. I was awake. By the time Harold came down for breakfast, I had already prepared the table. Just toast and eggs this time. No special plates. No flowers. Just the basics. I had even left one chair empty and taken my place opposite it, a quiet signal. He sat down, sipping his coffee with a half-grunt of acknowledgement. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then I cleared my throat. "Harold, can we talk?" He didn't look up at first. That irritated me more than it should have. "About what?" he finally mumbled. "Yesterday." He sighed, setting his mug down. "Margaret, I know you were upset. I just don't understand why you're making it a big deal. It's a number. A date. We've been together 40 years, shouldn't that speak for itself? My jaw tensed. I counted to 3 before I replied. It does speak. But lately, it's been whispering. Or maybe just sighing with boredom. That got his attention. His eyes lifted and locked with mine. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, more defensive than curious. It means, I said slowly, that I miss being seen. Heard. Appreciated. I miss being your wife, not your roommate. He leaned back, frowning. Where is this coming from? I gave a small, tired laugh. From years of quiet dinners. Forgotten conversations. One-sided anniversaries. Harold, when did we stop loving out loud? He stared at me, like he was trying to decipher a language he hadn't spoken in decades. I haven't changed, he said. I still love you, Margaret. I don't think all this romantic fluff matters anymore. We're older now. We've settled into a rhythm. That rhythm, I replied, feels like silence. A pause. He looked down at his plate. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly. I know, I whispered. But you did. I stood and gathered my plate, moving toward the sink. My back was to him now, but I could feel his discomfort filling the room like thick fog. Do you want out? He asked suddenly. I turned. What? This marriage, he said. You're not happy. You think I've stopped caring. Maybe you'd be happier without all of this. I didn't respond right away. I studied him. No, I finally said. I don't want out. I want in. Back in. I want the man who danced with me in the hallway just because a song came on. I want the man who wrote me love notes in the middle of grocery lists. I want what we had, not because I'm clinging to the past, but because I believe it can still exist. He swallowed, hard. Margaret, I'm not that young man anymore. We've changed. I know, I said, my voice softening. But love doesn't retire, Harold. It doesn't have an expiration date. It just needs a spark. He rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. I didn't think it still mattered to you. I thought we were fine. That's the problem, I said. You stopped checking. You assumed. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't as heavy. It was tentative. Like we were standing on a bridge that had long been broken but was slowly, board by board, being repaired. He finally stood, walked toward me, and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. I'm sorry, he said. Truly. I turned to face him. I don't want apologies. I want effort. He nodded. Then I'll try. And though it wasn't a grand declaration of love, nor a sudden transformation, those 3 words meant more to me than anything he had said in a long time. He would try. And maybe, just maybe, that was a beginning. But I also knew this, I couldn't sit around hoping for change. I had to move too. I had to rediscover myself. Find joy on my own terms. I wouldn't wait for Harold to catch up. He could meet me on the path, or watch me from afar. But I was done sitting still. Because sometimes, to revive a marriage, you have to revive the person inside it first. And I was ready to breathe again. It didn't happen all at once, the transformation. It wasn't a lightning bolt or a single decision. It was a quiet rebellion. 1,000 little acts of defiance against the invisibility I'd allowed to creep into my life. The day Harold promised to try, something shifted, but not just in him. In me, too. That morning, I stood before my closet with new eyes. My usual clothes, simple sweaters, practical trousers, house shoes, suddenly felt like armor I no longer needed. I reached past them for the yellow floral dress I hadn't worn in years. It was soft, flowing, and just a little bold. I wore it anyway. I didn't care if it was too much for a grocery run. I curled my hair. Put on lipstick. The red one. As I stepped outside, the sun hit my face like a blessing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through her own life. I felt present. Real. My first stop was the library. I hadn't been there in ages, though I used to be the kind of woman who checked out 3 novels a week. I ran my fingers along the spines, smiling at familiar authors, Alice Hoffman, Elizabeth Berg, Isabel Allende. Then I picked one at random and sat near the window, soaking in the quiet. A woman around my age sat beside me eventually. Her name was Gwen. We struck up a conversation about the book she was reading, and it spiraled into talk of poetry, then music, then art classes at the local community center. "You should come," she said, handing me a flyer. I almost said no out of habit. But then I heard my own voice say, "I will." And I did. The next Thursday, I stood in a sunlit studio with a paintbrush in my hand and a canvas staring back at me like a challenge. I hadn't painted since college, but something about mixing colors, making shapes, letting my instincts lead, it was freeing. Harold noticed, too. "You've been out a lot lately," he said one night as we sat in the living room. "I've been living," I answered with a quiet smile. He didn't respond right away. "Then, you seem happier." I nodded. "I think I am." To his credit, he didn't sulk or protest. He simply asked, "Can I come with you sometime?" And just like that, I realized something: my healing didn't have to be a protest. It could be an invitation. But it started with me. I joined a walking group. Signed up for a book club. Volunteered twice a week at a thrift shop downtown. I began rediscovering the pieces of myself that had been buried under decades of motherhood, marriage, and routine. One afternoon, while helping sort clothes at the thrift store, a young woman named Lena struck up a conversation. She was recently married, wide-eyed and hopeful. 40 years, she gasped when I told her. "What's the secret?" I paused. "The secret," I said slowly, "is that there isn't one. Love doesn't just grow, it changes. And sometimes, you have to fall back in love with yourself before you can love someone else properly again." She smiled thoughtfully. "That's beautiful." It was. And it was true. That night, I came home to a surprise. Harold had cooked dinner. He'd lit candles. He'd set our wedding photo on the table. I blinked, stunned. "Thought I'd give this celebrating thing another shot," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. My heart fluttered, not like a teenager's crush, but like something older, deeper. Like a vine finding its way back to sunlight after years in the shade. We ate. We laughed. We even danced, clumsily, right there in the kitchen. No music, just memory. Afterward, I sat by the window while Harold did the dishes. I looked out at the night sky, thinking about the road ahead. I knew everything wasn't fixed. We were still figuring things out. But I wasn't lost anymore. Because I had remembered who I was. I had chosen to live again, not out of spite or escape, but out of love. For him. For us. And most importantly, for me. It had started as a journal entry. A way to clear the clutter in my heart. Something private, just for me. I remember the day clearly, early spring, sun warming the back porch, birds chirping like tiny choirs in the trees. I sat there with a mug of tea and a spiral notebook, intending to write down my grocery list. But instead, my pen moved differently. And without planning it, I began to write a letter to Harold. Dear Harold. If you're reading this, it means I finally had the courage to show you the part of me I kept hidden under quiet smiles and polite silences. I paused. My hands trembled. The words poured out after that. I wrote about the early days of our marriage, the way his laugh used to echo through rooms and make me laugh too. I wrote about the first time I felt neglected, the slow erosion of intimacy, the dinners eaten without eye contact. I admitted how lonely I had been, how long I had waited for him to see me again. I didn't hold back. But I wasn't cruel. Just honest. I also wrote about the things I loved about him. The way he tucked the blanket under my feet when I fell asleep on the couch. The way he still reached for my hand in church. The way he used to bring me daffodils, even though he claimed not to know a thing about flowers. I never stopped loving you, I wrote. I only stopped recognizing the man I loved. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a book on my nightstand, an old poetry collection he'd once given me on our 3rd anniversary. I didn't plan to give it to him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was more for me than him. But fate has a funny way of pulling strings you thought were safely tucked away. A few days later, I came home to find Harold sitting in the reading nook by the window. The book was in his lap. My heart dropped. He didn't look up right away. Just stared down at the open pages like they were sacred. I was just looking for something to read, he said softly. I didn't know. I didn't know you wrote this. I froze. Harold. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red. Not just moist, truly red, raw with emotion. You were going to leave me, he said, his voice cracking. No, I said quickly, sitting across from him. That letter wasn't a goodbye. It was a mirror. For both of us. He shook his head. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. Margaret, why didn't you tell me? I tried, I said. In small ways. But you were so used to the silence that you stopped listening. And I got tired of shouting into it. He closed the book and held it against his chest like it hurt to touch. You're right about everything in here. I lost track of us. I didn't mean to, but I did. And I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. I felt it, Harold. And I believe you're trying. But I need you to know that trying isn't about one dinner or one dance. It's about showing up, again and again, even when it's hard. Even when we're tired. Especially then. He leaned forward. What do I do now? Keep reading, I said. Not just letters. Me. Learn me again. He reached for my hand. Can I write you back? I blinked. What? A letter, he said. Of my own. Maybe I need to reflect, too. Maybe I need to remember who I was, who we were. I smiled. It was the most sincere thing he'd said in years. Okay, I whispered. That night, while I read poetry, he sat beside me with a notepad. The soft scratch of his pen was the only sound. And it felt peaceful. A few days later, I found his letter on my pillow. It was messy. Rambling. Unpolished. But it was his truth. He spoke of fear, of becoming irrelevant. Of aging. Of how his own father had retreated into silence in his later years, and how Harold had unknowingly followed that blueprint. I thought if I kept things simple and stable, I was doing my part. I didn't realize stability can feel like stillness. And stillness, to you, felt like abandonment. I cried reading it. Not because it hurt, but because it healed. We began writing to each other weekly after that. Letters tucked into drawers, under plates, in coat pockets. Sometimes serious. Sometimes playful. Sometimes poetic. They became our new language. Words saved us. Words reminded us that we weren't done. Not yet. We had more to say. Love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it writes quietly into the cracks and makes them whole. And all it takes is one letter you never meant to send. The day he surprised me with my own life. It started with a note. Not one of our usual tucked-away letters, but a single card placed on the kitchen table, resting against a tiny potted plant with yellow blooms. My name was written on the envelope in Harold's neat, blocky script. Margaret, Saturday is yours. Pack a bag. Casual clothes. Comfortable shoes. No questions. Trust me. H. I stared at the note for a long moment, my fingers brushing the soft petals of the plant beside it. Daffodils. He remembered. Saturday came, and I packed as instructed, light, casual, with cautious curiosity. When Harold pulled into the driveway that morning, he was humming. Humming. I hadn't heard that in years. He opened the car door for me, like he used to when we were dating. "You ready?" he asked, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I guess," I replied, both amused and nervous. "Where are we going?" He just smiled. "You'll see." We drove out of town, away from the routine. Away from the grocery stores and the church and the places we knew too well. The countryside opened up like a soft quilt of green and gold. An hour later, we pulled into a quiet vineyard I'd always loved but never visited. I gasped. "Harold. I mentioned this place once, years ago." "I remember," he said. "You said you dreamed of painting it one day. So I thought, maybe today's the day." He led me to a small setup beneath a willow tree, 2 easels, a picnic basket, folding chairs. Watercolor sets. A thermos of tea. I covered my mouth with my hands. "You did this?" He nodded. "I asked Gwen where you buy your paints. She helped me put it together. I wanted to surprise you with, well, you. The version of you I know you've been rediscovering. The woman who paints. Who dreams. Who laughs." I blinked back tears. "I thought I lost her," he added. "But I was wrong. She was always there. I just stopped looking." We spent the whole day painting. Neither of us was particularly skilled, his trees looked like broccoli, and my clouds resembled spilled milk, but it didn't matter. We laughed, sipped tea, shared sandwiches, and for once, time didn't feel like a thief. It felt like a gift. Mid-afternoon, we sat back and looked at our awkward, joyful masterpieces. "You remember when we first got married," Harold said quietly, "you used to say that we'd never stop trying to impress each other?" I smiled. "I remember. I stopped trying, Margaret. Not because I didn't care, but because I thought we were past that stage. I thought comfort was the goal." "It is," I replied. "But comfort doesn't mean apathy. It means feeling safe to grow together. Not apart." He nodded. "Thank you for not giving up on us." That night, back at home, I opened the trunk to bring in out things and found something else waiting for me, an old photo album, newly restored, pages reinserted and corners taped. On the first page, in his handwriting, "A Life Worth Celebrating, Volume 1. Inside were photos I'd forgotten existed, me, barefoot and glowing, holding a toddler in the backyard, Harold, young and strong, flipping pancakes on a Sunday morning, our children at graduations, quiet Christmases, messy birthdays. And right in the center, a blank space with a sticky note. Next chapter, Margaret's Vineyard Masterpiece. I pressed my hand over my heart. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a passenger in my own story. I felt like the author again. And more miraculously, I had a co-writer. We sat on the couch that night, looking through every page. There were tears, yes. But they were the kind that cleanse. That stitch wounds closed. And I thought, maybe this is what anniversaries are really about. Not champagne and roses. But recommitments. Rediscovery. Remembrance. Maybe it's not about the date at all. Maybe it's about choosing the same person every day, again and again. Even when they forget. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Especially then. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet and slow, the kind of day where the air is thick with old memories and new questions. Claire, our eldest daughter, had come over with her 2 little kids. While the children played in the backyard under Harold's watchful eye, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table sipping tea. She looked tired. Not just from chasing toddlers, but soul-tired. I knew that look well. I had worn it like a second skin for years. She tapped her spoon against her mug, then blurted it out. "Mom, do you think love is still worth it?" The question didn't shock me. The ache behind it did. I set my mug down slowly. What's going on? She shrugged, her shoulders slumping. James and we're fine. At least, we look fine. We function. We share responsibilities, pay bills, go to work, take care of the kids. But. She paused. We don't really see each other anymore. Not like we used to. I don't know if I'm in love with him, or just in love with who we were. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was trembling. Claire, I said softly, that's not just your story. It's the story of every long marriage at some point. The falling out of rhythm. The slow forgetting. The questioning. She stared at me. You and Dad, did you ever feel that way? I laughed, not out of humor, but recognition. Oh, sweetheart. There was a time I thought we were strangers under the same roof. I cried in the shower so no one would hear. I stared out windows, wondering if this was it. If love had run its course. If I was foolish to believe in it. Her eyes welled up. But you stayed. I stayed, I nodded. And then I wrote a letter I never meant to send. And he read it. And something shifted. Claire looked down. I feel like I can't even begin to say what's wrong without sounding ungrateful. That's how it begins, I said. By believing that speaking your needs is selfish. It's not. It's survival. She bit her lip. So you think love is still worth it? I thought of Harold outside, chasing bubbles with the boys, his face soft with joy. I thought of the vineyard, the paintings, the scrapbook he surprised me with. I thought of the silence we used to sit in, cold and distant, and the silence we sit in now, warm, easy, full of peace. Yes, I said. I do. But not love as it's sold in movies. Not the constant passion, the grand gestures, the perfect endings. Real love is messy. It requires maintenance. It asks for forgiveness over and over. It grows differently over time. Claire nodded slowly. What if it never grows again? Then you'll know, I said. But don't give up before you fight for it. And fighting doesn't mean yelling or begging. Sometimes it's as simple as telling the truth. Asking to be seen again. She wiped a tear. I'm scared. So was I whispered. But I did it scared. And I'm still here. Still in love, though it looks different than it did at 20. And that love, Claire? The weathered kind? It's stronger than anything new. We sat quietly after that. Just two women, two mothers, two wives, connected by more than blood. Later that evening, as she gathered her boys and hugged Harold goodbye, she lingered at the door. Thanks, Mom, she said. For being honest. I don't think people talk about this stage of marriage enough. They don't, I agreed. But maybe you'll be the one to talk about it with someone else someday. She smiled faintly, then drove off. That night, I told Harold about our conversation. He listened carefully, then kissed my forehead. She's lucky to have you, he said. We're lucky to have found our way back, I replied. And in that moment, I knew. Love hadn't just been worth it. It had become the very thread that wove our lives together. It had been one of those unpredictable spring days, the kind that starts with sunshine, turns moody by noon, and threatens thunderstorms by dusk. Harold and I had spent most of it inside, sorting through boxes in the attic. We'd stumbled upon all sorts of forgotten treasures, Claire's old ballet shoes, Michael's hand-drawn superhero comics, a cassette tape labeled Margaret's Mix, 1983. He laughed when he found my collection of vintage scarves. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, he teased, wrapping one around his neck like a movie star. I still do, I said, striking a pose. But as the afternoon wore on, the attic became stuffy. Dust swirled, nostalgia weighed heavy, and before long, we were both emotionally drained. We left the boxes half-sorted and wandered downstairs. Harold suggested a walk, despite the darkening sky. Come on, he said. We'll beat the rain. Besides, you always say the air smells better before a storm. He wasn't wrong. We strolled through the neighborhood like we used to in our younger days, no destination, just each other. We talked about little things, a neighbor's new puppy, the restaurant that had finally reopened, how much the world had changed since we were young. It was peaceful. Easy. Until the first drop fell. It landed square on Harold's nose, and he stopped mid-sentence. Oh. We both looked up. And then the skies opened. Not a drizzle. A full, unapologetic downpour. We shrieked, laughed, and started to run, but halfway down the block, I stopped. Margaret. Harold called, already 10 paces ahead. I turned slowly, rain plastering my hair to my face. Wait, I said, breathless. Let's not run. He jogged back, confused. We'll get soaked. We're already soaked. I smiled. Lightning streaked across the sky, far away, followed by a low rumble. The rain wasn't cold, it was warm, refreshing. It clung to my skin like 1,000 tiny kisses. I always wanted to do this, I said quietly. Do what? Dance in the rain. He raised an eyebrow. Right now? Right now. And before he could answer, I took his hand. No music. Just the sound of raindrops, wind rustling leaves, the distant boom of thunder. Our feet found a rhythm of their own. I spun. He dipped me, awkwardly. We laughed. We swayed. We kissed. It felt like something out of a movie, but it wasn't. It was real. Honest. Raw. And it was ours. Neighbors peeked through their windows. A few cars slowed down. But we didn't care. Because in that moment, I wasn't 62, and he wasn't 64. We were just two people in love again. Somewhere between the dance steps and the laughter, I remembered our first kiss, under a porch light in the middle of a summer storm. I remembered the way he had looked at me at 22, like I was the only woman on earth. He was looking at me that way again. And I realized something: love doesn't expire. It doesn't weaken with time. It simply transforms. It becomes deeper, rooted in years of shared laughter, pain, silence, and rediscovery. We eventually walked home, drenched and breathless. As we tailed off in the foyer, Harold looked at me. You know, that might be one of the best dates we've ever had. Better than Paris? I teased. Better than Paris. That night, I made hot cocoa, and we watched old movies on the couch, wrapped in blankets. My heart felt full, like every crack had been kissed and sealed. Later, just before bed, Harold took my hand again. You still surprise me, Margaret. And you're finally remembering who we are, I said. He nodded. I never forgot. I just got distracted. I kissed his cheek. Then thank God for rain. That night, we didn't fall asleep like usual. We talked. Deeply. Honestly. About everything and nothing. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized that second chances aren't just given, they're created. Sometimes, all it takes is a storm. A week after our rain-drenched dance, things began to feel different, not dramatically, but subtly. It was like something inside Harold had softened. His footsteps were lighter. His eyes lingered on me longer. And his silences no longer felt so distant. But there was still something unspoken. I could feel it in the quiet moments, like when he'd start to say something and stop. Or when I'd catch him staring at our wedding photo as though it held a secret he wasn't ready to share. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of tangerine and rose, I found him out on the back porch. He was nursing a cup of chamomile tea, his favorite these days, staring at the horizon like it held the answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. I joined him silently, settling into the rocking chair beside him. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he said, "Do you remember our first apartment?" I smiled. That tiny place above Mrs. Dorsey's bakery? The walls smelled like cinnamon every morning. He chuckled. And the faucet always dripped. We laughed softly together, lost in memory. Then his voice dropped. That's when I first started to feel like I could be something, because I had you. I turned to him slowly. Margaret, he continued, you've always been the best part of me. But somewhere along the line, I stopped showing you that. I didn't interrupt. I just let him speak. I got caught up, he said. In working. Providing. Chasing. I don't know what. Respect? Success? I told myself I was doing it all for us. For you. But the truth is, I stopped asking if that was what you needed. I blinked back tears. His voice had that old tenderness, the one I used to hear in letters and lazy Sunday conversations. He took a shaky breath. I forgot our anniversary, not because I didn't care, but because I thought there was nothing left to celebrate. I'd convinced myself we were just going through the motions. That after 40 years, maybe the best was behind us. My heart clenched. But then you wrote that letter, he whispered. And I realized, it wasn't too late. We weren't finished. We were just paused. I reached for his hand. It was warm, familiar. Steady. There's something else, he said, barely audible. Something I've never told you. My breath caught. He looked straight into my eyes. I've always been afraid I wasn't enough for you. The words stunned me. You? I said, shocked. Harold, you've always been. He shook his head. No. Let me finish. I watched you build a home, raise our children, support me through job changes, grief, illness, and you never once asked for anything in return. Not really. You gave, and I started to wonder what you saw in me. Especially in the years I was emotionally absent. His voice cracked. I was afraid to ask. Because I thought, maybe you stayed out of duty. Maybe I had already lost you. Tears spilled freely now, on both our cheeks. I cupped his face. Oh, Harold. I never stayed out of duty. I stayed because I loved you. Even in the silence. Even in the pain. I was just waiting for you to come back. He pulled me into his arms. We stayed like that, wrapped in 40 years of love, sorrow, growth, and quiet redemption. Then he whispered the words I didn't know I'd been aching to hear. I want to fall in love with you again, Margaret. Every day. In little ways. Will you let me try? I smiled through the tears. I thought you'd never ask. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not a big gesture. Not fireworks or music swelling in the background. Just the quiet, soul-deep acknowledgement of two hearts choosing each other. Again. And that, I realized, was the truth I needed. Not an apology. Not a grand act. But the knowledge that even after everything, even after disappointment, neglect, forgetfulness, Harold still wanted us. Still believed in us. And that kind of truth, it changes everything. An idea came to me late, in the quiet hours of the night when the house had gone still and the only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan. I was curled up on the armchair in our bedroom, wrapped in my old robe, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. Harold was asleep, his breathing deepened even beside me in the bed. The past few weeks had been full of rediscovery. Small gestures, kind words, thoughtful silences. Every day brought something new. He started leaving me notes again, like he used to in the early days. Tucked into the kitchen drawer. Folded inside my book. Once, even taped to the bathroom mirror. You are still the best thing I've ever done. But something inside me still needed to be expressed. Not for him, but for me. A way to gather every scattered piece of feeling, every unspoken moment, and give it a home. So I reached for the drawer in my nightstand and pulled out the same pale blue stationery I used 40 years ago when I first wrote him a love letter. I uncapped my pen. And I began. My dearest Harold. Tonight I find myself overwhelmed, not with anger or disappointment, but with the fullness of a love that has survived the years, the wear, the bruises, and the silences. I remember the girl I used to be. Nervous, soft-spoken, full of dreams. I remember how you looked at her, the way your smile lit up every part of her that was unsure. You made her feel seen. And then we lived. Really lived. We raised babies and buried parents. We paid bills and celebrated milestones. We had good years and gray years. And somewhere in the in-between, we forgot how to say the things that mattered. But here we are. Still standing. Still choosing each other. You once asked me why I stayed, even when you forgot our anniversary. Why I never walked away. The answer is simple. Because I never stopped loving you. Even when I missed you while you were sitting right next to me. Even when I cried alone in the laundry room, folding your shirts. Even when the silence between us felt too loud to bear. I loved you when you were strong and when you were lost. Because love, real love, doesn't walk away when the music fades. It stays and listens to the silence. It waits. It believes. And now, as we step into this new chapter, whatever it may look like, I want you to know this. You are still my favorite person. You are still the man who made my heart race with a crooked smile and nervous hands. You are still the person I want to hold at night when the world feels too loud. And if I had to do it all over again, every hard day, every missed moment, every quiet ache, I would. Because I'd get to end up here. With you. Forever loving. Margaret. By the time I finished, tears were streaking down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were release. Peace. A soft kind of joy. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and left it on his nightstand. I didn't wake him. I didn't need to. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, holding the letter like it was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He just opened his arms. And I walked into them. That embrace said everything. Later that day, he asked if I'd write another letter someday. I don't need to, I said. We're finally saying the words out loud. He smiled. But I knew I would. One day, maybe years from now, when our hair had silvered further and our bones ached more often, I would write again. Because letters, like love, have no expiration. And sometimes, a love story isn't finished until the very last word is written. The house was buzzing with a kind of warmth only family can bring. That morning, our daughter Claire dropped off her youngest, Ellie, for a few hours. Claire had a dental appointment, and Harold and I were more than happy to spend time with our spirited 6-year-old granddaughter. Ellie was a burst of sunshine from the moment she walked in. She had on her favorite pink overalls, a daisy clip in her wild curls, and a grin that could melt even the grumpiest hearts. She ran into the kitchen, her tiny sneakers thumping across the wooden floors. "Grandma! Grandpa," she squealed. "Guess what? I know how to spell love now." Harold turned from the stove, where he was attempting pancakes. "Is that so, little flower? Show us." She beamed with pride, grabbed a napkin and a crayon from her backpack, and carefully wrote in large, colorful letters. "Love." "Perfect." I cheered. "And what does love mean to you, Ellie?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "It means, when Grandpa gives you the last pancake even though he really wants it." Harold laughed, placing a pancake on her plate. Guilty. She wasn't done. "It's also when you tell someone they can sleep with the nightlight even if you don't like it. Or when you hold their hand when they're sad. Mommy says love is a verb. That means it's something you do." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Ellie's words weren't just sweet, they were pure, unfiltered wisdom. And in them, I saw our entire marriage mirrored in childlike simplicity. Harold caught my eye from across the table. That knowing glance again, the one that said, "Can you believe we raised someone who raised someone like her?" After breakfast, Ellie asked if she could play wedding. She dragged Harold into the backyard with a fake bouquet made of dandelions and weeds, insisting he marry me all over again under the old oak tree. I stood there, barefoot in the morning grass, while Ellie played minister. "Do you, Grandpa Harold, promise to share pancakes forever and ever?" she asked. "I do," he said, solemn and smiling. "And do you, Grandma Maggie, promise to let him have the TV remote sometimes?" Laughter bubbled from my lips. "I do." Ellie clapped. "You may hug the bride." Harold pulled me into his arms, and the three of us twirled around under the wide branches of the oak, the breeze rustling the leaves like applause. It wasn't just a game. It was a reminder. Love isn't always candlelit dinners or dramatic speeches. Sometimes, it's shared pancakes. It's giving up the remote. It's twirling barefoot in the backyard with a 6-year-old officiant. That afternoon, after Ellie left, Harold and I sat on the porch swing, reflecting on the morning. "She's right," he murmured. "Love is a verb." "It always was," I replied. "We just forgot for a little while." He took my hand in his. "We're remembering now," he said. And we were. With each small act, each touch, each laugh, we were writing new chapters in our story. Not dramatic ones, but real, enduring ones. Because sometimes, the most profound lessons don't come from books, or therapy, or years of marriage, they come from a 6-year-old with a daisy in her hair and a crayon in her hand. And in that moment, I knew that our love story wasn't just for us anymore. It was a legacy. It was a quiet Sunday evening. The kind of evening where time seemed to slow down, wrapping everything in a golden hue. We were in the living room, Harold in his favorite chair, and I on the couch wrapped in the quilt my mother gave me when we first got married. We weren't doing anything particularly special. The TV played an old black and white film neither of us were watching. The real story was in the silence, the comfort, the ease of being together without needing to fill the space with noise. Then, out of nowhere, Harold spoke. "Maggie," he said, his voice calm but filled with something deeper. "Will you marry me again?" I blinked. He looked over, his eyes moist with something more than sentiment. "I mean it. Not a vow renewal for show. I mean, start over. Choose each other again, like it's day one." I sat up slowly. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Because for the first time in a long while, I feel like I've finally learned how to love you the way you deserve. And I don't want the rest of our days to be spent coasting on memory. I want us to build again. New memories. New traditions. New joy." I felt my heart stretch wide. Bigger than it had in years. We had been through so much. We had weathered storms that cracked our foundations. We had lost touch, found each other again, and learned that love isn't something you arrive at, it's something you keep arriving at, day after day. "Yes," I said simply. "Yes, Harold. I will." And this time, it wasn't about flowers or rings or guests or white dresses. It was about a morning cup of tea shared in silence. It was about him remembering how I like my toast. It was about writing letters and laughing under trees. A month later, we stood beneath that same oak tree Ellie had used for her backyard ceremony. Our children were there. Michael, Claire, and Jamie. Our grandchildren played barefoot in the grass. There was no orchestra, just the sound of birdsong and breeze. Claire officiated this time, her voice trembling with emotion. And when Harold said, "I do," he looked into my eyes like it was the very first time. When it was my turn, I said, "I always did. I always will." We kissed, not like a scene in a movie, but like a quiet vow renewed in the deepest parts of our souls. And when the cake was cut and the laughter echoed into the early night, I pulled Harold aside. "You know," I whispered, "you gave me the best anniversary gift after all." He smiled, puzzled. "I forgot it, remember?" I shook my head. You reminded me that love doesn't fade, it just needs light. And now, we were the light. Hand in hand, heart to heart. Forever, again. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone you love made you feel seen again, after you thought they had forgotten how? Or maybe you had to be the one to show up again for love. What did that moment look like? Share your story with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love showed up for you again. If this story touched your heart, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real-life inspired, emotionally powerful stories every week. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to start over in love. Whether it's your first time or your 41st anniversary, love can always begin again. Until next time, keep choosing love. And remember, even when the music fades, the dance can still go on.